When the off-duty police officer snapped the handcuffs on the black mother at the PTA meeting, he thought he was silencing another complaint about school funding. He had no idea her husband was a decorated Army colonel, and the next morning, 3 military attorneys were at the school demanding the body cam footage. Her name is Dr. Alicia Vance, a pediatrician and mother of 2. She was speaking at her local school board in a district where schools serving black students receive $2,000 less per student each year. Her crime: presenting data on overcrowded classrooms while an off-duty officer, also a parent, decided her time was up. But this arrest was captured on multiple phones, and the footage reveals a power play that was about to backfire spectacularly. Alicia Vance had spent 6 weeks preparing her 3-minute public comment. She wasn't just a concerned mom. She was a doctor analyzing public health data, and what she found in her district's budget was a diagnosis of systemic neglect. Her children attended Fernwood Elementary, where 92% of students were black or Latino. Just 8 miles away, at predominantly white Sunny Ridge Elementary, the per-student funding was $2,300 higher. This wasn't an accident. It was policy. The district used local property taxes as the primary funding source, a system that directly punished communities historically denied home loans and subjected to discriminatory zoning. The night of the meeting, the school cafeteria was packed. The agenda included a vote on a new resource officer contract. Officer Mark Daniels sat in the 3rd row, off-duty but in plainclothes, there because his son played sports at the middle school. He'd made comments to other parents before the meeting started, complaining about, quote, aggressive activists wasting the board's time. Alicia waited her turn, her notes trembling slightly in her hand. She wasn't nervous about speaking. She was furious about what she had to say. When she approached the microphone, she began with cold, hard numbers. Fernwood's roof leaked in 7 classrooms. Their library hadn't received new books in 4 years. The district's own data showed black students were 3.5 times more likely to be in chronically underfunded schools. She held up a chart showing the $2,700 annual funding gap. This gap, she stated, isn't a budget shortfall. It's an active choice. And it's creating a public health crisis for our children. Officer Daniels shifted in his seat. He later claimed he felt the meeting was becoming, quote, disorderly. But board meeting records show no outburst, just Alicia's measured, data-rich presentation. The tension came from the content itself, from the undeniable math of inequality. Then Alicia made her crucial mistake, at least in Daniel's view. She named names. She quoted an email from the district superintendent referring to Fernwood as a, quote, budget sinkhole. She mentioned the school board president's recent comment about parental entitlement. Daniel stood up. He didn't identify himself as an officer at first. He just said, "Ma'am, your time is up. You need to sit down." The board president tried to gavel him down, reminding him it was a public comment period. But Daniels moved toward the front, flashing his badge now, claiming he was, quote, preserving the peace. What happened next was a blur captured on shaky phone footage. Daniels reached for Alicia's arm. She pulled away, saying, "Don't touch me. I have the floor." He grabbed her again, this time twisting her arm behind her back. You can hear a child in the background crying, "Mommy," as the metallic click of the handcuffs echoed through the suddenly silent cafeteria. But here's what the officer didn't know. Alicia's husband, Colonel James Vance, was 8,000 miles away in Kuwait, leading a joint logistics task force. Their marriage worked on unspoken trust and precision timing. Every evening her time, they had a 15-minute video call. That night, she missed it. He got a notification that her phone location was at the county precinct. By the time Alicia was processed, released on her own recognizance with a trespassing charge, and retrieved her phone, she had 23 missed calls. When she finally answered, her husband heard 2 things: the tremor in her voice, and in the background, the arresting officer booking her, laughing with a colleague about another PT, a lawyer wannabe. Colonel Vance didn't raise his voice. He asked 3 precise questions. Was she injured? Was the arrest on video? Did the officer identify himself properly? Then he said, "I'm making calls. Do not speak to anyone until JAG calls you." JAG, the Judge Advocate General's Corps, the military's legal arm. At 7 the next morning, a black sedan with government plates pulled into the school district headquarters. Two attorneys in Army service uniforms and a chief warrant officer in dress blues walked into the superintendent's office. They presented a formal request for all video evidence of the incident, citing the Uniform Code of Military Justice and its provisions regarding dependents of service members. The superintendent was stunned. He asked, "On whose authority?" The lead attorney replied, "On the authority of Colonel James Vance, and by extension, the United States Department of Defense." Meanwhile, Officer Daniels arrived for his shift, unaware his life was about to be dismantled by a bureaucracy far larger than his local precinct. He'd filed his report, characterizing Alicia as combative and the meeting as on the verge of a riot. He believed the matter was closed, but by 10 a.m., his bodycam footage was not just with internal affairs. It was being copied onto a secure server for military attorneys. The school board, scrambling, contacted their own lawyers, who gave one piece of chilling advice: do not delete a single email. The military has a different chain of command, and they do not play procedural games. The stage was now set for a collision between two entirely different justice systems. One was local, flawed, and often influenced by personal relationships. The other was federal, hierarchical, and relentless in its procedural rigor. And caught in the middle was a video, the bodycam footage from Officer Daniels that showed the entire arrest from his own perspective. A recording that would prove one of two things: either a legitimate peacekeeping action in a volatile crowd, or the catastrophic abuse of power by a badge who thought no one was watching. The fight for that video would become the fight for the truth itself. The bodycam footage was stored on a secure server, but accessing it legally was a battle the military attorneys were prepared to fight. Their first move wasn't a request. It was a subpoena under the Military Extraterritorial Jurisdiction Act, a law rarely used on American soil. Captain Lisa Reyes, the lead JAG attorney, argued that because the victim was the dependent of a service member on active duty, and the alleged crime impacted the member's morale and welfare, the military had a compelling interest. The local judge, skeptical, gave them 72 hours to make their case. Meanwhile, the police union lawyer told Officer Daniels not to worry. This was, he said, a classic overreach that would blow up in the military's face. But Captain Reyes had a secret weapon: precedent. In 2019, a Marine spouse was assaulted by a civilian contractor overseas, and the MEJA was successfully invoked to try the case in a military court. Reyes adapted the argument: if the military could intervene abroad to protect a dependent, why not at home when the local system showed bias? She filed a 50-page motion citing the funding disparity data from Alicia's presentation as evidence of a hostile environment for military families of color. This wasn't just about an arrest. It was about whether the local institutions could provide equal protection. The school board, panicking, held an emergency closed session. Their attorney warned them the military's involvement changed everything. Normal public records delays wouldn't work. If they obstructed, they could be facing federal obstruction charges, not just bad press. A split vote authorized the release of all meeting footage and internal communications about Fernwood Elementary. What they didn't know was that Alicia, acting on her husband's advice, had already filed a parallel federal civil rights complaint with the Department of Education, triggering yet another investigation into the district's funding practices. The board was now in a pincer movement. Officer Daniels' bodycam footage, once retrieved, told a different story than his report. The video showed a calm cafeteria until he stood up. The audio clearly captured Alicia saying, "You are interrupting a public forum." It captured the board president saying, "Officer, please sit down." And it captured Daniels' response, "She's done." The critical moment, the grab and the cuffing, was shot from his hip, a jumbled angle of cafeteria tables and stunned faces. But the audio was crystal clear. No warning of arrest, no citation of a specific law being broken, just the sounds of struggle and that definitive click. When the police chief reviewed it, he ordered Daniels placed on administrative leave. The charge was now a department liability. But here's where the story twists. The police union dug in. They launched a counter-narrative. The military was bullying a local hero. They leaked selective snippets of Daniels' record, 22 commendations, a life-saving award to the local paper. They framed Captain Reyes as an outsider, a politicized JAG officer overstepping her bounds. This sparked a furious backlash in the community. At the next school board meeting, two factions formed. One side held signs saying, "Support our police." The other held signs with the $2,700 funding gap figure. The division was raw and national, playing out in a single school cafeteria. Alicia Vance, however, was working in silence. From her medical office, she began cross-referencing. She obtained the district's budget through a public records request and mapped every expense. She found that Sunny Ridge Elementary, the well-funded school, had a brand new athletic complex. Fernwood had a leaking roof, but more damningly, she found the contract for the school resource officer program, the very program the board was voting to expand the night of her arrest. The contract showed the police department stood to gain over $600,000 in new funding. Officer Daniels wasn't just a parent in the crowd. His department had a direct financial stake in a positive vote. Captain Reyes seized on this conflict of interest. She amended her legal filing, arguing Daniels had a pecuniary interest in silencing dissent about school funding, as that dissent could jeopardize the resource officer contract. This transformed the case from a simple dispute into an alleged conspiracy to suppress free speech for financial gain. The local district attorney, facing intense political heat from both sides, finally did something unexpected. He recused himself entirely, kicking the case to the state attorney general's office. The state's involvement was the domino Captain Reyes needed. The attorney general's public integrity unit had no loyalty to the local police union. They convened a grand jury to examine not just the arrest, but the school funding formulas and the resource officer contract. Subpoenas flew out to school board members, the superintendent, and the police chief. For the first time, people were asked under oath about the email calling Fernwood a budget sinkhole. Then a breakthrough from an unlikely source. Louis Ortega, the school district's IT administrator, contacted Alicia's lawyer. He was a quiet man, a father of 3 at Fernwood. He said he couldn't sleep after seeing the arrest video. He had access to the district's internal messaging system, and he had found something. Threads between the superintendent and the board president discussing how to manage the narrative after Alicia's data presentation. In one exchange, the president wrote, "We cannot let the funding gap argument gain traction. It opens us up to liability." The superintendent replied, "Daniels will keep the meeting on track. He understands the stakes." Ortega provided screenshots. This was the golden thread connecting the arrest to a possible conspiracy. Captain Reyes took it to the judge overseeing the MEJ a subpoena. The judge, now facing evidence of potential corruption, granted the military full access to the bodycam footage and all related police reports. The video was to be turned over in 48 hours. But the police union had one last move. They filed an emergency motion to block the release, claiming the video contained sensitive police tactics and would endanger Officer Daniels' safety. It was a delay tactic, but it worked for another 72 hours. The tension was now a ticking clock. Every hour of delay was an hour for narratives to harden, for evidence to get lost. During this delay, the national media finally descended. A major network ran a segment titled "The Battle of the Cafeteria: School Funding, Police Power, and a Colonel's Wife." It laid out the funding disparities with national data, citing the study that showed districts serving the most students of color received $23 billion less overall. The story was no longer local. It was a microcosm of America's fights over race, resources, and justice. Officer Daniels, watching his life play out on national news, made a decision. He agreed to a televised interview. Sitting stiffly in his lawyer's office, he claimed he acted solely to prevent a disruption. He said he feared for the safety of the children present. He never mentioned the resource officer contract. When shown the quote about understanding the stakes, he said he had no idea what it meant. His performance was calm, but his eyes betrayed a simmering panic. He was a man who followed the chain of command, and now that chain was crumbling above him. The day before the video was finally to be released, Captain Reyes received a sealed envelope from the state's investigation. It was a preliminary finding. Their forensic audit of the police department's internal affairs files revealed something shocking about Officer Mark Daniels. He had been the subject of 3 prior complaints for overly aggressive conduct at community events, all dismissed without investigation. One was from a black city councilman at a town hall. The pattern was there, buried in closed files. The system had protected him until it couldn't. Armed with this, Reyes didn't just want the video released. She wanted it released with a statement from the Department of the Army, condemning the wrongful arrest of a military dependent and citing the systemic failures that allowed it. This was no longer about one charge. It was about dismantling the machinery that made the arrest possible. The stage was set for the video to drop, but its impact would depend on what happened next. A frantic scramble in the shadows as the school board and the police department, realizing the walls were closing in, made a desperate choice to protect themselves. The sealed envelope Captain Reyes received didn't just contain Daniels' complaint history. It included a forensic analysis of the school district's server, revealing that the night after the arrest, someone had tried to permanently delete the entire internal messaging archive. The attempt failed. The IT system had a 72-hour backup buffer, but the digital forensics pointed to a login from the superintendent's office computer at 11:18 p.m. This was no longer about a bad arrest. This was about obstruction of justice. Captain Reyes immediately forwarded the findings to the State Attorney General's Public Integrity Unit, who obtained a warrant to seize the superintendent's computer. The pressure shattered the unified front. The school board president, fearing federal charges, called an emergency meeting without the superintendent. In a recorded session, she revealed the superintendent had told her, quote, "We need to make this go away before the feds see the rest of it." The rest of it was a series of emails showing the resource officer contract wasn't just about safety. It was a political kickback. The police union had endorsed 3 school board members in the last election, and the $600,000 contract expansion was drafted just weeks after they took office. Officer Daniels, watching his allies crumble, was called in by his own union lawyers. They presented him with a choice: become the fall guy for the entire department, or cooperate with the state and federal investigation. They offered him a generous severance and legal protection if he took full responsibility for the arrest, calling it an error in judgment. But if he cooperated, he'd be ostracized and likely lose his pension. Daniels left the meeting without an answer, a man trapped by the very system he served. The next morning, the bodycam footage was released to the public. The state attorney general held a press conference, playing the key 90 seconds on a large screen. The footage was devastating. There was no chaos, no threatening crowd, just a clear sequence. Alicia speaking calmly, Daniels standing up without cause, the improper cuffing, and the chilling audio of him saying, "She's done." The video went viral, amassing over 2 million views in 6 hours. News anchors replayed it, analyzing every frame. Legal experts called it a textbook case of a wrongful arrest and a violation of First Amendment rights. But the real bomb dropped that afternoon. Luis Ortega, the IT administrator who provided the screenshots, gave a sworn affidavit to the state investigators. He stated that the superintendent had called him personally, pressuring him to clean up the chat logs and hinting at a promotion if he complied. Ortega wore a wire for his next meeting with the superintendent, who was now in full damage control mode. On the recording, the superintendent said, "We can't let a disgruntled parent and her military husband blow up a decade of progress. The resource officer program keeps our schools safe. That doctor doesn't understand the big picture." The big picture was now on tape. The Attorney General, armed with the attempted deletion evidence, the kickback emails, and the wire recording, moved to arrest the superintendent on charges of conspiracy to obstruct justice, bribery, and official misconduct. Police officers, some of whom had worked with Daniels for years, arrived at the district office to take their longtime collaborator into custody. The perp walk was broadcast live, a surreal scene of police arresting a school official over the arrest of a parent by another police officer. The system was beginning to eat itself. With the superintendent in custody, the floodgates opened. Two assistant principals from Fernwood Elementary came forward, stating they had repeatedly warned the district about the unsafe conditions, but were told the budget wasn't there. A former district budget analyst provided spreadsheets showing how funds were deliberately shifted from Title I schools like Fernwood to cover shortfalls in the wealthier schools' athletic programs. The pattern was intentional, systemic, and now indefensible. The school board, in a desperate attempt to survive, voted unanimously to terminate the resource officer contract and fire the superintendent. They announced an independent audit of all district finances going back 10 years and pledged to rework the funding formula. It was a stunning surrender, but for Alicia Vance, it wasn't enough. The arrest charge against her was still pending, a technicality the local prosecutor was clinging to. Captain Reyes had one final move. She petitioned the court to dismiss all charges against Alicia under the legal principle of selective prosecution. She argued that Alicia was arrested not for her actions, but for the content of her speech that exposed corruption. To prove it, she entered into evidence every email, every budget transfer, every deleted message. The hearing lasted 3 days. On the final day, the judge asked the prosecutor a simple question. "Can you name one other person who has ever been arrested for speaking during the public comment period at a school board meeting in this county?" The prosecutor could not. The judge dismissed the case with prejudice, meaning it could never be refiled. Alicia was cleared. But the victory was incomplete. Officer Daniels still faced no criminal charges. The police internal affairs investigation, now under state oversight, recommended termination but not prosecution. The union was fighting to keep his pension intact. The message was clear. The system would sacrifice the school officials to save its own. Colonel Vance, watching from Kuwait, understood this calculus. He authorized Captain Reyes to take the fight to the last, most insulated institution, the police department's qualified immunity shield. Reyes filed a federal civil rights lawsuit on behalf of the Vance family, naming Officer Daniels, the police chief, and the city as defendants. The lawsuit sought not just damages, but a court order mandating sweeping reforms to police training on First Amendment protections and the creation of a civilian oversight board with real power. The legal complaint quoted the $2,700 funding gap, framing the arrest as violence used to protect an unequal status quo. The city council, facing the financial ruin of a massive lawsuit and the relentless glare of national media, panicked. They offered a settlement, a $500,000 payment to Alicia, the termination of Officer Daniels, and the creation of a task force to study police conduct at public meetings. Captain Reyes and Alicia refused. The money wasn't the point. The task force was just another delay tactic. They wanted precedent. They wanted a legal ruling that would make what happened to Alicia illegal everywhere. As the federal lawsuit proceeded, discovery unearthed the deepest, most corrosive secret. The police department's own protocols, updated just 2 years prior, explicitly stated that off-duty officers should not intervene in public forums unless there was an immediate threat to life. Daniels had violated his own department's policy, but the training records showed he had never actually completed the mandatory module on that new protocol. The department had failed to train its own officer, then was prepared to defend his actions. The lawsuit now had a direct line to the city's liability. Facing certain defeat at trial, the city council made a final, historic offer. They agreed to every demand in the lawsuit: the Civilian Oversight Board with subpoena power, mandatory First Amendment training for all officers, a public apology, and the full $500,000 in damages. In return, the Vances would drop the suit. But there was one more condition, insisted upon by Colonel Vance himself. Officer Daniels had to surrender his police certification, ensuring he could never work in law enforcement again. Daniels, abandoned by his union and out of options, agreed. The day of the signing, the cafeteria at Fernwood Elementary was silent. It was a Saturday. Alicia Vance stood at the same microphone she had used months before. This time, she was surrounded by her legal team, community leaders, and her children. The city council president read the apology aloud, his voice shaking. The agreement was signed. It felt like an ending. But as the cameras left and the officials dispersed, Alicia looked at the still leaking roof, at the outdated books in the library, and she knew the hardest work was just beginning. The machinery that created the inequality was still intact. They had won the battle against its enforcement, but the war for the resources themselves was waiting. And for that fight, she would need a different kind of army. The signed agreement was headline news, but the real work began the next Monday morning, when the newly formed Civilian Oversight Board held its first meeting in the same cafeteria where Alicia was arrested. Its first action was to subpoena the complete budget audit. What they found was a masterclass in creative accounting. The district had been using federal Title I funds, money specifically earmarked for low-income schools, to pay for administrative salaries and even landscaping at the district office. This wasn't just unfair, it was illegal. The board referred the findings to the state, triggering an immediate freeze on all non-essential district spending and a demand for repayment. With the superintendent facing criminal charges and the district under state receivership, the school board was dissolved. The state appointed an emergency manager, a no-nonsense former superintendent named Dr. Annika Patel, whose first visit was to Fernwood Elementary. She stood under a leaking ceiling tile and announced that repairs would begin that week, paid for by clawing back funds from the canceled resource officer contract and the superintendent's discretionary budget. For the first time in a decade, money was flowing toward the need, not away from it. Officer Mark Daniels surrendered his police certification, as required. He moved out of state, taking a job in private security. The police department, under the new civilian oversight, implemented the mandatory First Amendment training. But the most significant change was procedural. Off-duty officers were now explicitly banned from intervening in public meetings unless directly requested by the presiding official. The policy was named the Vance Protocol. Colonel James Vance completed his deployment and returned home. At a quiet ceremony at Fort Bragg, Captain Lisa Reyes was awarded the Meritorious Service Medal for her legal work. The citation noted her vigorous defense of the constitutional rights of military dependents. The case became a study in JAG training, a textbook example of using military law to defend civil rights on domestic soil. For Alicia Vance, the victory was measured in textbooks and roof repairs, but also in fear. She received hate mail. Her medical practice saw a brief dip in patients, but she also received hundreds of letters from parents across the country, sharing stories of their own underfunded schools and intimidating board meetings. She realized her case had become a blueprint. With the help of a national education nonprofit, she drafted a model resolution for school districts, titled the Equitable Funding Transparency Act, requiring districts to publicly report per pupil spending by school annually. 3 states introduced versions of it within a year. The $500,000 in damages. Alicia and James Vance didn't keep it. They used it to establish the Fernwood Fund, a grant program for teachers at high-need schools to buy supplies, fund field trips, and repair classroom materials. The first grant paid for a new library carpet and 2,000 new books at Fernwood. The fund was structured to be independent, managed by a committee of parents and teachers, ensuring the district could never redirect the money. But the most surprising outcome was what happened to Luis Ortega, the IT administrator who wore a wire. After the superintendent's arrest, the interim administration promoted him to Director of Data Integrity, a new position created to ensure budget transparency. His first project was building a public-facing dashboard where anyone could see in real time how every dollar in the district was spent, school by school. The dashboard went live 6 months after the arrest. On its first day, it received over 50,000 views. The era of obscure budget transfers was over. The state's criminal cases concluded. The former superintendent pleaded guilty to conspiracy and obstruction, receiving 3 years in prison. The school board president testified against him and received probation. The resource officer contract was permanently canceled, and the funds were reallocated to hire 8 new counselors and social workers for the district's neediest schools. A year to the day after the arrest, Alicia Vance stood again at the microphone in the Fernwood cafeteria. The roof was fixed. The library was full. The Civilian Oversight Board was listening. She wasn't there to present data on disparities. She was there to present the annual report from the Fernwood Fund, showing how small grants had paid for a science lab upgrade, a music program, and after-school tutoring. The funding gap between Fernwood and Sunny Ridge had narrowed by 30%, though it still existed. The fight, she acknowledged, was not over, but the power dynamic had irrevocably changed. As she finished, the board chair, a new member elected after the scandal, did something unprecedented. She asked the entire room to stand and observe a moment of silence, not for anything lost, but for the principle that had been defended. The right to speak, to question, to demand accountability without fear of handcuffs. The cafeteria was silent, the same space that had once echoed with a child's cry and the click of metal. Now it held the quiet weight of a promise kept. The story of that arrest rippled far beyond one school district. It was cited in a federal court ruling limiting qualified immunity for off-duty officers. It was used as a case study in a congressional hearing on school funding equity. And for military families everywhere, it sent a clear message. The chain of command could extend home to protect their own. The final, personal twist came from Colonel Vance himself. Upon retirement from the Army 2 years later, he didn't take a lucrative private sector job. He enrolled in law school, specializing in education law and civil rights. His stated goal was to provide the legal defense for other families that his family had needed. The first case he took as a student advocate was for a Navy spouse in another state, facing retaliation for complaining about mold in her child's classroom. The cycle of protection had begun anew. The system had been forced to correct itself, not out of goodwill, but because a mother with data, a father with resources, and a lawyer with precedent applied relentless pressure to its weakest points. They proved that even the most entrenched machinery of inequality has release valves. You just have to be brave enough and smart enough to find them. And sometimes, you need an army at your back. The arrest in the Fernwood cafeteria exposed a dangerous friction point in American life. What happens when the machinery of public education collides with the power of policing, and who gets to decide when speech becomes a crime? This wasn't just about one officer or one school board. It was about 2 systems, both suffering from the same disease, a lack of true accountability. The funding gaps that Alicia Vance highlighted, amounting to $23 billion less for districts serving students of color, create the inequality. The presence of police in schools and the mindset that allows an off-duty officer to act as a censurer enforces it. The victory here was procedural and specific. It proved that with the right leverage, the system can be forced to correct its worst excesses. The Vance Protocol, the Civilian Oversight Board, the Transparent Budget Dashboard, these are tangible reforms born from unbearable pressure. But they also pose the central, lingering question: does achieving justice require a decorated colonel, a JAG attorney, and a viral video. What happens to the parent without that network, without those resources? The data suggests they are silenced, or worse, criminalized. Studies show Black students and students with disabilities are referred to law enforcement at nearly twice their share of the student population. The pipeline from the classroom to the courtroom starts with the mindset that certain dissent is disorder. The deeper lesson of Fernwood is about power, who has it, who guards it, and how it is ultimately made accountable. It revealed that the most potent weapon against systemic failure is often just the unwavering light of attention. The bodycam footage, the deleted emails, the budget spreadsheets, each was a thread that, when pulled, unraveled a tapestry of complacency. The story ends not with a solved problem, but with a transferred burden. The fight for equitable funding is a daily, unglamorous grind of policy meetings and budget votes. The vigilance against police overreach requires constant civilian engagement. The work has been handed from the extraordinary advocates back to the ordinary citizens, where it always belonged. So the next time you walk into a school cafeteria for a meeting or any public forum, remember the weight of that space. It is where a society decides what it values, who it hears, and who it protects. The most profound changes often begin not with a revolution, but with a question asked into a microphone, and the collective decision that the answer must be heard. If you found this story of accountability compelling, leave a like to support this channel. And subscribe, because tomorrow's documentary explores another hidden battle where ordinary people challenged impossible odds. I'll see you there.